Even More Righteous Falsehoods. By James P. Pierce. In the previous post, I pointed out how strange the political spectrum has become. Foregone conclusions are always going to be things of the past, yet to treat them with the expectations out of a political system or a religious system is something entirely different. Those who want to talk about the kingdom of God infused into their politics, or those that reject it completely, are my main targets here. These self-destructive tendencies are always going to be foregone conclusions, but self-destruction is for another post and not this one. The nefarious consequences of preaching the kingdom for profit is what I am going to get at. Being pretty well astute with the early fathers of the church, this is something that is always going to be relevant, their words reflected on today's preachers. Their asceticism reflected on today's profiteers, and their compassion reflected on today's racketeers. This has led to the path of moral consumption. This consumption has not resulted in any wisdom. This wisdom is the foregone conclusion when one is either presented with false ideologies or even something much worse, bad catechesis. This creates an even high-functioning realm of disillusion. This destroys someone from the inside out, as many authors have pointed out. In a word, it is nihilism. It can be rooted in almost anything. Across the board it usually boils down to bad theology. Catharsis will only create more cathartic teachings and practices. As St. Thomas Aquinas put habits into actions and actions into an ethos, so can someone who has undergone this foregone conclusion of this catharsis. It always will cycle itself into some kind of wisdom. Now, to venerate wisdom for wisdom's sake, is something that can turn Gnostic pretty quickly. To avoid that gnosis, is something that the Catholic Church struggled with. This is why I hearken back to the early fathers of the Church. St. Thomas was an exception by that point, but we could even look at the 400 texts on love by St. Maximus the Confessor. There were numerous times in the text he pointed out a list on the highest order of love. That highest order of love should always be aimed towards God. There should be no anger, strife, grief, rancor, or lust towards one neighbor. Replacing that will of our own volition, we should replace it with the will of God, as this is the highest type of love. He cited numerous times about how God is love, yet because of the catharsis of the West, that has become ideologized into foregone conclusions of worldliness and not godliness.